Now, in 2018, domiciled under the Ministry of Education, girls in public schools, secondaries were to get free sanitary towels, if you like, pads, at a cost of 470 million, approximately 10 million per county. But several years down the line, this program is facing headwinds. Tonight, we're going to be talking about menstrual health with a focus of ending stigma and moving the conversation from gender-driven to societal moves. Joining us tonight is none other than nominated Senator for Women Affairs, that is Senator Gloria Orwoba. Karibu sana. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's break the ice. The conversation is what you were wearing on Tuesday when the Senate resumed its sittings. That was quite unconventional, and it has drawn a lot of headwinds and a lot of debate. Was it necessary?
Is it necessary to have periods? Because that's the question. It's not about what I was wearing, it's about what happened. Yeah. I stained my pants. I had a suit on. And I didn't think that it was good enough a reason for me to miss out on the opening of the Senate, because that was the first day. I had a lot of things that I wanted to push. I wanted to be there. It's my first time being in the Senate, so some of these things are my first time experiencing. So I thought I'm not going to miss that session for nothing. So there was just no time to go back home and change. Yeah.
And now that brings a question of stigma when it comes to menstrual health. Just as I pointed out that this particular program, and I'm borrowing heavily from what we're expecting to see next week, where you have actually sponsored a motion where to have the provision of free sanitary towels and to end what you term as period poverty, you know, the shadow pandemic that we do not talk about. Now, this is not a new program, looking back at 2017-2018. So why now?
Actually, the first bold step that the Kenyan government took was in 2011, when they introduced now the program of provision of sanitary towels.
Yes.
That was in 2011. They spent around 420 million just distributing. It was a first good step. And then we had a setback with the 12th Parliament, because the 12th Parliament actually reduced the budget by half, from 470 million to 260 million. And you know, already from 2011, when we were trying to address the issue, the 420 million was not sufficient. It was a starting point. And of course, the intention or the expectation was that the budget will keep increasing to a point where all schools were actually accessing the free sanitary towels. But you know, a lot happened, and the issue of period poverty was actually not taken seriously, or maybe there was not, I will say, political goodwill. So you can see that we have actually regressed in terms of the developments that we should have been having now. From 2011 to 2023, surely we should be at the point where we are saying that we are almost getting to all the national schools having that access to the sanitary towels.
Now, this motion that you are sponsoring come next week, how then will it now put this into perspective and become more effective?
The motion actually addresses two things. The issue of how to legislate the program, because currently the program is running on a sort of amendment act that is embedded in the Education Act. That's not really, you can enforce it, but it's a lot of the details are actually dependent on the political goodwill. For instance, budget allocation is not stipulated. It's not a percentage of a ministry budget. It's not a, you know, it just depends on which government of the day. So it means if we have a government that is patriarchal, that does not really care about this issue of period poverty, they might even say we are just going to allocate 50 million, and what, you know, it's really dependent on who's in office. So I'm trying to find a way to legislate that so that it doesn't matter who's in office, but in terms of budget allocations, at least to some extent, or in terms of a financial provision to some extent to which we can try and legislate, we can see that through. The second thing is the whole end-to-end of the program needs to be streamlined so that we don't have loopholes where people are taking advantage of the program. For instance, the procurement regulations around it is a big thing, because, you know, first of all, Kenya was the first African country that took out the taxes on pads, but that means only the final product. So when you import the pads, then you don't pay the import duty and stuff on the final product. But when you look at the local manufacturers, they don't import the final product, they import the materials, and the raw materials are still highly taxed. So we need to find a way where we can address that, so that, you know, the period poverty starts from the point of poverty in itself. It means that people don't have the capital, the money to buy, to purchase these items. Why don't they have the money? They are not employed, they don't have businesses. So the local manufacturers actually play a key role in terms of even participating in ending period poverty. How? When you have the companies, the local manufacturers actually getting some of these tenders, then it spurs the creation of casual jobs for quite a while. And that is a source of income for many of parents who are actually now using the same money to purchase their sanitary towels. So we need to regulate on issues on how to ensure that that industry thrives. That's one thing. The other thing is we must also specify the frequency at which government provides. Currently, government provides once a year. There's a provision of once a year, so you get your batch, and from the research that I've done, the students get between 5 to 7 packets, those that have received between 5 to 7 packets for the year. Now you have your period every month, you know, every month you're using a minimum of 2 packets. If you do the math, we are barely getting to the point where we are saying that we are giving access to that. So I'm also trying to see how is it that we can legislate around that. And then finally, it's also the issue of the whole period poverty and period stigma, period shaming. What happened to me in Parliament was, it was saddening. And you see, people were saying, yeah, but you need to have figured out your days and what days. A lot of, I would say, ignorance around menstruation, because basic things like understanding that not every woman has a regular period clearly came out as a concern, that, you know, the community at large doesn't really understand the menstruation issue. But not only that, it's the idea of it's okay to be kicked out of your workplace because you have had an accident that has stained, because people see that as shameful and dirty, and so you cannot be subjecting people to that. That is the same stigma and the shame that, you know, when our students who accidentally stain their clothes are kicked out. So we have to be able to also legislate that to an extent that it is not a point of authority that the child feels like, I can't go to school because in the events that I stain, I'll be punished, I'll be shamed, and this. So basically
having conversation that matters of menstrual health are not by choice. Actually, this is nature. So we talk about them. Though when you talk about menstrual hygiene, it also falls under the reproductive health conversation, which are termed as taboo. Yet we need to have these conversations. Now, let me take you back to a statement that you made. Is like a patriarchal society. You mentioned that. But we want to drive this conversation of menstrual health and bring in and rope in the men. How do we move it from a gender issue to a societal issue, from where you sit? You know, the thing is, however way we look at it, it's a gender issue. And that's why even part of my motion wants to embed whatever regulations within the Ministry of Gender. But the bigger problem is within the community. For instance, when I go to distribute pads, now that all of this has happened, I am going with my 15-year-old son. And he's having, with the permission, of course, of the engagement, we have to ensure that it's a safe space, because still girls are feeling like it's not a safe space. It's something we must discuss in secret. But, you know, with the few schools that I've gone to, and I've tried to say, okay, once we are done with the conversation, can you allow me to have my son come in? He would like to have a word or two. It starts from there. It starts from that generation. Because if the boys also understand that this is a normal thing, and they become part of the conversation, and they become part of the support system that we put around our girls during this, I would say, very confusing and difficult times of puberty, when they're going through the whole menstruation thing, then we remove the issue of shame. We remove the issue of stigma. In fact, to an extent that perhaps in another 10, 20 years, if something like that happens to a senator in the Senate, you know, the speaker would
not even want to engage with that conversation. You know, the speaker would probably say it becomes a non-issue.
It becomes just
news.
Something that we had not talked about. But before we get there, we've talked about the issue that government cannot go alone. There's the issue of goodwill in the governments of the day. But then the issue is there room, is there provision to have, you know, the private sector also get onto the bandwagon to ensure that we actually deal with this issue once and for all?
In fact, one of my key focus areas has been, and this is not just now when it's come to the limelight, like for the last up to 10 years, has been engaging the civil society in terms of advocacy, because they do a lot of advocacy, they do a lot of sensitization, how to engage the civil society to talk to, you know, our young girls and how to deal with menstruation issues, engaging the corporates, you know, to participate in ways of CSR, because even if we get to a point where this Kenya's economy is able to sustain itself and even provide that kind of money from its own source to give all, it's very expensive, it's not a cheap affair. So it would be good to have a lot of PPPs between government and the corporate private sector, so that they can come on board and say, okay, this is what we want to give back, this is how we want to ensure, for instance, you know, education, our kids are actually not having issues in school. So it's a conversation that has to start from somewhere, and I'm just glad that first of all we've normalized having this conversation. Like the other day in Senate, now the day after, I had my male colleagues, they were like, hey, how are you okay today? I'm like, yeah, today the cramps are a bit low, but I'm good.
You're fine. So it has not become it's not taboo.
It's not taboo.
It's a conversation we are having.
Absolutely.
Now, as we wind down to this conversation, in your opinion, which arm of government, or department in government should actually run point in this? We have the Ministry of Education targeting, you know, the schools. They have the networks. We also have now the Office of the Women Rep, which also wants to be part and parcel of this program. Then we have the Department of Gender. It feels as if we have so many players, each pulling. We are walking in one direction, but we are.
So first of all, I think Parliament should stay out of wanting to run programs. We play oversight. So the Women Rep position, they know better than to ask to be the drivers. They should play oversight to ensure that whoever is implementing this particular program actually implements as it should be. I have had a conversation with our Minister of Gender, Waziri Aisha Jumwa, and the good news is she's actually assured me that it's a conversation they've been having, and we talked about it, and they've pushed the budget up to 410 million up to June, and then she's assured me that between 2023-2024, the proposed budget actually allocates 1 billion for this particular program of provision of free sanitary towels. Now, I think, because this is a gender issue, I think that it should be embedded in the Ministry of Gender. And thankfully, our president thinks the same, and he has actually given a presidential directive that, in fact, this will be the final financial year where the Ministry of Education will be conducting procurement of sanitary towels. The president actually understands what we are trying to do, because, you know, we had the Women's Charter, and this was some of the things that we promised Kenyans. So we are trying to implement it. So he has already given a direction that it is dealt with at the gender level, but in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, because the distribution of the same will be done within the school system. And really, how government should be is government should look at ways to synergize between the different departments. This is a clear case of that. But for purposes of ensuring that we do not end up with another KEMSA, yes, we need the lead Ministry of Gender to lead point in this. Yes, absolutely.
Now, parting shot as we talk about, you know, demystifying and, you know, moving away from taboo conversations when we talk about menstrual health, men shy away. But now we've said the direction we should take is that also have our boys, our young men in this conversation. Parting shot.
My parting shot, especially to girls, and I've been giving this talk for so many years. I always tell them that every month when you have your period, you have actually been given the power by God to bring forth life. So it should be something that you celebrate. It should be something that you're like, oh, I'm on my period. Yes. That's a reminder that I can actually bring forth life. And so it turns it from the stigma that, you know, that is there. It's something to celebrate. And for the wider society, I think it's this way. I know there are things we don't want to be subjected to visually. And the problem is when we have not subjected the society with a real picture on the ground, then they just assume that there is no problem. But there is a shadow pandemic. It is period poverty. It is period stigma. And it is time that we start dealing with it intentionally.
Asante sana Mheshimiwa.
Thank you.
Now let's rope in the gentleman on the team this evening. Gloria, what do you say in regard to having the men also join the conversation when you're tackling the issue of menstrual health?
No, I agree completely. I saw the reaction from her male colleagues on the floor. And a bit I thought there was an overreaction. But then again, the rules of a senator are rules of a senate, so probably that's how it goes. Probably my question for you, Senator, would have been because you have agreed with the president that the whole concept and the supply of sanitary pads be now under the Ministry of Gender. Kindly tell us, what problem did you have with it being domiciled under the Ministry of Education? Because I mean, it has infrastructure, it has the structures.
Yeah.
What problem did you have?
Two major things was that, one, for instance, there was a disconnect between what was happening on the ground and the distribution of the, for instance, who decides which schools get the free sanitary towels and based on what? You understand? So from that perspective, you get enough insight from the Ministry of Gender to tell you, because they're dealing with it as a title in its own, to tell you that in these areas, period poverty is, extreme. And so we should focus on that's one thing. And the second thing is that while the Ministry of Education is actually the distributing, let's say, framework, I think when it comes to matters gender, and because you could see how even in the Senate, it was so misunderstood. I think we should leave it to the gender experts.
To carry the day. Ministry of Education will argue that they have the schools and the numbers, but this is something we're going to be keenly focusing on, given that it's coming up for hearing next week, Tuesday.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Time for us to put a cap on Sunday Express. Thanks very much for joining us. And of course, great thanks to you, Senator Gloria, for joining us this evening. My name is John Jacob Curia. Lensa Odingo has been a sign language interpreter. Have yourself a fantastic week ahead.
I'm Regina Manyara. Have a great week ahead.
Absolutely.